Welcome to the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. I'm Calum Hawley, Chair of the GBTA Europe Transportation Committee and Managing Director of BTC Global, and I'll be your host for today's episode. Joining me today, I'm thrilled to have two experts in our industry, Ben Park, Direxy Regional Europe GBTA, and the Executive Director of Travel and Sustainability at Parexel, and Peter Harbison, Chairman of Greener Airlines and co-founder of FAX. Hi, Ben.
Hey, hi, Calum. Nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Excellent. Not busy at all.
Well, I'm sure we'll hear more as we go along. And Peter, thank you. I know you're in Sydney, so it's quite late for you today. So thank you very much for joining. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Pleasure to be with you, Calum. Thank you.
Thank you both for being here. We're recording at a time when escalating tensions in the Middle East are no longer a distant risk. They're actively disrupting fuel supply, increasing prices, and impacting flight availability globally. For corporate travel managers, this is already translating into higher costs, cancellations, and reduced flight options across regions. So the question is, what does this mean in practice? And how should buyers respond? That's why we've got yourself, Ben, and yourself, Peter. I'm going to come to you both separately with a couple of questions with regards to this. So, Peter, we're already seeing rising fares and cancelled flights. From your perspective, how severe is the impact right now, and how quickly is it evolving?
Well, on the latter question, it's evolving very quickly. I think, although it's not evident to everybody, there's an awful lot not being said, I think. But in terms of the phase that we're at the moment, is really some relatively modest reductions in capacity, some fairly substantial increases in pricing, partly due to fuel cost, additional fuel costs, but also to some extent airlines taking advantage of the moment to push prices up. And yet to come is really probably the more difficult part, which is when fuel resources start to dry up.
And Ben, is that sort of sound familiar from your perspective too?
Absolutely. And I can confirm that a lot of things are not being said or pushed to the media, which I think should at the moment. So I'm seeing really at the moment the stuff you see is what we're seeing the last 7 weeks now, with the impact to the Middle East crisis on reduced capacity, duty of care risks and stuff. And now we are seeing lately the first price increases on flights, average ticket prices going up, and also some airlines are announcing capacity cuts. But I think the bigger piece is to come, and I think that's the task of the travel managers and everybody in the industry now, to really prepare for what could come from June onwards. And I think this is where we as an industry need to start talking about it, that we're all prepared.
And you mentioned that price increasing is already being seen. Is that happening everywhere? I mean, inevitably, supply and demand dictates that we might see some price increases with a disruption in a supply chain. But are all regions the same? And if not, why? Ben, please.
Yeah, maybe I'll start what I'm hearing from other travel managers, and then Peter can add if this matches the science and the data. But what I'm seeing is that actually what has been predicted, that in US the airlines are not hedging, which results into price increases, is very visible. If I talk to my colleagues, they're all seeing huge price increases across the America. In Europe, it's not that much of an increase yet, unless you fly long haul. But the intra-Europe in Asia, it's a mixed bag, definitely. So I think it matches what has been reported at the moment on which airlines are better protected for the current phase and which are not protected by high volatility of jet fuel pricing. But happy to hear if Peter says that matches or not.
No, it does. Hedging is an extraordinarily complex business, nowhere near as simple as we generally take it to mean. For example, one particularly keen example is Qantas. Qantas is hedged for its oil to about 80 or 90%, I'm not sure exactly of it, until the middle of this year, which is the end of our financial year. However, they didn't hedge the so-called crack spread, the difference between the price of oil and the price of jet fuel, which typically was sort of sitting around $20 or $30 above the price of oil. It's now 5 times that much. And they haven't hedged the crack spread. They haven't hedged the jet fuel price as opposed to the oil price. So they're exposed. Across this region, it tends to be that most of the airlines aren't very, very well hedged and therefore very much exposed. And of course, in this region, particularly exposed because there is such enormous reliance on the Gulf for their oil sources. Just about every country relies close to 100% on the Gulf, and therefore the Strait of Hormuz is having a massive, massive impact.
And so, Peter, from a global perspective, you would suggest that really APAC are probably sort of as a region seeing the most strain in terms of that supply chain piece. And is it the region as a whole? Is it specific countries? Obviously, you've mentioned Qantas there as a particular airline. Are there other airlines that are maybe more at risk than others within the region too?
Yeah, I think when talking East Asia, I mean, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh are really suffering severely, and from day one virtually. In this region, it's down to both oil supply and distilleries and the or refineries rather. Not
The
distilleries.
distilleries would be great, though. Yeah.
Important, yeah. But particularly Singapore, South Korea is where we get in Australia our refined product from. I've got a couple of small refineries here. China has very, very large resources, but they're publicly holding a lot of that back because they want to ensure that they've got domestic supply. So the issue is not just oil; it's the refinery. So Singapore is under great pressure from every political partner to make sure that we get the refined jet fuel product. But so you've got this delay. You've got this delay of the oil getting there, the refining, then being delivered to the country. So there's a bit of sort of a staggered response there.
And I suppose you touch on something actually really key there, which is it isn't just countries trying to get supply because of the disruption, but actually countries that have supply are also wary that they want to keep supply for their own requirements. So actually, I also read the other day that China and I think Korea have both mandated that they can only export zero or a certain amount of oil at the moment and jet fuel at the moment. So it creates just another cog in the wheel of complexity for people to think about.
And what I'm seeing is from some news that if there is supply, it will first go to the major hubs. So as a travel manager, I think we should all get prepared that these smaller local airports, if there is a fuel shortage or any capacity cut, they will be hit first. And I think this is what I'm seeing already in the news. The example like Lufthansa, I think in the last days announced a lot of flight reductions. And if you actually look at the detail, it's these airport codes where we all struggle in remembering them. So it's not the big hubs. They're already like, I think looking at this, these are the not as profitable routes. These are the airports which are at risk getting jet fuel. And I think that's what we will see future. So my prediction would be if there is fuel shortage, the hubs will most likely continue to work, but these smaller regional airports will be hit first, and with this, the capacity there.
And is that the sort of thing that you would agree with
that's a
there,
very good
Peter?
point. I would. I mean, I mentioned Singapore. Singapore is obviously a major hub for the southern part of East Asia, particularly for Australia. It's our major hub now. But the other interesting feature here, of course, is it's not just fuel supply; it's airline supply. The great bulk of our from anywhere sort of south of Vietnam, really, and even beyond that, the bulk of connectivity with Europe has been through the Gulf. So we're not only losing the fuel, we're losing the airlines in terms of corporate travel, particularly. I mean, all of Qantas's international operations to the east, with just a very few exceptions, have been on Emirates metal, and so that disappears. What we're seeing there, incidentally, is that Emirates, Qatar, and Etihad, the main Gulf carriers, are discounting strenuously to encourage people to fly that way, like something like half the price of flying on Qantas. But going back to the hard point, yes, Singapore, Hong Kong, which involves China, obviously, in a large way. To a lesser extent, Bangkok, because they're suffering with fuel issues too. But Singapore, I think, is the main beneficiary in this region.
I suppose, you've mentioned Qantas there, Peter. There, in terms of how long they may be able to continue in the current situation, and you mentioned their price. And somebody, I'm sure I'll get a horrible message from Qantas at some point for suggesting this, but almost price gouging, right? If there are flights at $5,000, $6,000, 7,000 on the Gulf carriers, but they are, the likes of Qantas and Singapore, for that matter, these airlines will be knowledgeable that corporate duty of care policies are unlikely to allow their employees to fly through those regions currently. It's not just fuel increasing, dare I say it.
Yeah, I think they'd probably dispute the verb you used there, but undoubtedly an element of taking the opportunity. I mean, we could argue, if I was arguing the airline side of it, I'd say, look, we're suffering very badly, not just in terms of fuel prices, but in terms of custom. We're losing, for example, Qantas is pulling a lot of its US metal onto the European route.
Right.
So that market's pretty well dead at the moment. So yeah, but I think you're right to a certain extent. There is an element of opportunism, put it that way.
A slightly controversial comment, but where I was trying to go with it is that I do understand the airline side of things. To be fair, they are having to reduce capacities. There are increased prices. It must be really very difficult. And Ben.
Yeah, regarding the duty of care challenge you mentioned, what I'm hearing from buyer colleagues which is interesting, there is a mixed bag. Some decided to ban flying via the Middle East carriers because of duty of care risk. It's like better be safe, and others are continuing to allow this. So I think the message is some go for, hey, there is a cheap fare out there, let's use it, and others are basically duty of care is more important. So it really depends, and I'm seeing everything. So it's definitely not that all corporates are equally banning to fly via the Middle East carriers, but I can definitely confirm, as well as you mentioned, Peter, for Qantas, the European dominant carriers have increased prices a lot. So it's definitely it's hard at the moment to justify trips to Asia.
I think you mentioned a really important thing there for the buyer community, Ben, which is there's no right or wrong. There is, there's no sort of this is what you must do. It is very much culturally dependent on your business and the security aspects and safety aspects that you work, teams that you work with. I'm going to stay on the buyer side of things actually now, and Ben, just come to you. What can buyers do to prepare? I mean, obviously, it's probably going to be quite a quick bit of preparation. But if we're looking, the uncertainty is very difficult. We don't know how long this is going to go on for, whether there will be a continuing ceasefire or a forever ceasefire, hopefully, which will hopefully help with supply chain issues. But what can they do to protect and mitigate risk to their programming going forward? What are you seeing? Are you seeing anything from peers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things which everybody should look at and prepare. And first, for me, is the operational risk. Like, where do you see reduced capacity, which is important to your city pairs you are flying, or where there are risks, city pairs which are at risk. So are you probably be impacted or not? And also operationally, talk to your TMC and stuff. There will be a lot of short-term cancellations. And if you rely on maybe the GDS to get the order change notification like 30 minutes, 40 minutes later, that's maybe not good. So basically, the changes will happen more often. Be prepared for this. The second thing is also, I think, the financial planning in the company. Because if we see prices going up and travelers continue to travel because they need to conduct revenue for the company and stuff, but the budgets have not been adjusted.
Yeah.
We might run into this traditional end of Q3. We've used all our annual budgets. Not the Australian financial year. I know you're in July, but basically the last quarter is then at risk. And I think it's to elevate the role of the travel manager. It's important now to go and say, like, we need to adjust the budgets or manage them more closely so we don't run into issues. So I think that's an important part. And also our cross-functional job is now asked to go to HR, risk, to the financial planning teams, to go to the different departments and share what you know so that everybody can prepare. So in the example of if you're in professional services and you're cross-charging a lot of your travel cost, you might want to alert the clients, hey, our invoices might be a lot higher than you expected. And it's not because we're doing something bad here. So there's a lot of stuff where we all can talk more, but also have a close conversation with your TMC, because I think they're already short on labor and we will see a lot more changes, cancellations. And how do you prepare for this?
Yeah, so it's ultimately communication and being transparent and proactive with regards to it with the different stakeholders. And it does definitely give a platform, I think, to travel managers to say, look, we are important and we can help. We want to help, and that's really, really helpful. And if it does continue, the situation in the Middle East, or even hopefully not, but escalates, I suppose what's the next phase of impact that the industry should be ready for? I think, Peter, we had a conversation a short while ago where you had, and I think it was with regards to Australia and fuel. I think you'd mentioned something about there being 30 days left, and it was quite a stark figure that you had given. I don't know if you just wanted to talk about that very quickly.
Yeah, sure. And I don't think Australia's the only one. I think probably we're being a bit more public about it. One thing I would just quickly like to say in terms of both the duty of care and pricing, I think Emirates is now back, which is obviously key hub through Dubai from between Europe and Asia. Emirates is back now, according to different reports, about 75% of previous frequencies, which is pretty substantial. And I think I'm sure they would argue that it is actually, from their point of view, perfectly safe to be flying through there. Add to that the other point that Ben was making about pricing. They are charging $10,000 for a business class fare between Australia and London. So that's a real attraction. But to go to your point specifically, Ben, Calum, on the fuel. We've talked a lot about the fuel the pricing and availability of service. The real issue becomes when fuel actually dries up, and as you mentioned, we do have apparently it's a sort of 30-day limit in Australia, which which will increase, I hope. It hasn't actually diminished a great deal in the last 2 weeks. But it does tend to suggest, unless something drastic changes, that when we get to the end of May, we're going to be looking at some very, very stark decisions. Even if things do change pretty quickly in the Gulf, because it's going to take a long time for the supplies to start coming through again. So I think if we're talking about this in a month's time, we're probably going to see a very different picture. And I think on the balance of probabilities, that's likely to be the crunch time.
And I suppose ultimately, from a buyer perspective, that means probably, we don't know what's going to happen, but in these regions where it is really affected, having a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C is probably necessary, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in some Asian countries and some European, it's actually a great opportunity for travel managers to bring up this, the funny thing with the 2 tracks with the rail, with this steamy rail thing as a green option, to say, why don't we switch to rail and use less flights? Also promoting again for company car fleet, the electric cars. So there is opportunity to like look at your folders from like the last years before green didn't be or dropped on the priority list. But one thing I want to mention for Peter is really this. I think Australia is very transparent, and that's good. The other aspect is what I've seen yesterday from the European Commission, the Sustainable Transport Commissioner has posted that he's not aware of any fuel shortages for the European Union, and he doesn't see any lack of supply. So it's very interesting to watch like what people who are very close to this saying to what the politics are saying. So maybe they just want to give us peace that we are not like freaking out here, but it's definitely it's hard to find out what's true at the moment, correct?
I think that was going to be my last question. Was going to be, where do you have any little nuggets of places to go to try and find out reliable information? As you say, it differs depending on where you are, but are there any bookmarks that we should be suggesting to people to add to their browsers, or is it just about staying across multiple different news outlets?
I think that's what you've got to do. I mean, put it this way, a couple of weeks ago, our Prime Minister went on TV to make a special address to say, don't worry. And until then, I wasn't worried. So you've got this quandary that nobody really wants to say what's likely to happen. They're just saying what's happening now. So I think, in answer to your point, Calum, I think you'd really just do have to scour the reliable news sources and cross-check them. There's not going to be anything, even with IATA, that's sufficiently up to date and candid to let you know what's going on.
But simple ways to look if you've got any reporting tool from your travel agency or internally, look at your average ticket prices by region, by domestic long haul, and just monitor the last weeks. And I think that's a very good indicator for you as your company, what you may be facing. So one, IATA, also I think GBTA, of course, is trying to put out more research. And I think from BCD at Vito are doing great things there on putting out price forecasts and others as well. But the most simple thing is look at your own data, which tells you already, if you look the last 3-4 weeks, you will see some differences, I'm quite sure.
And I can certainly say as a committee, certainly as a transportation committee across GBTA, we'll definitely start and continue to share those independent pieces where we can, so that the things that are relevant. We are at time, gents. I'm sure we could talk for hours, to be honest, and maybe we'll have another opportunity in the future. Well, actually, I hope we don't have another opportunity in the future, because it might mean that things are starting to resolve a little bit. But should we need to, then we will. But I can only say thank you so much to you both for giving your time today. And thank you to everybody that's listened. You've been listening to the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. For more information about GBTA and its work, visit gbta.org. and be sure to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, thanks for listening.